Cathaoirleach. Yeah, well, Minister, I obviously read a report of where you were talking about index linking the welfare payments to the, I don't know whether you were talking about the cost of living index or the average earnings, an average earnings index. And I note that I think the Taoiseach, when he was actually Minister for Social Protection, he himself first kind of floated that idea. And it's been discussed obviously for a long time. Dr. Sean Healy, of course, Social Justice Ireland, has advocated strongly that it would be the social welfare rates would be linked to average earnings, and that well, first of all, we have to establish that social protection rates will be above the poverty line, and then that they're linked to average earnings. So I just wonder, what are you thinking on this? What kind of work has the department done on it? Thanks, Cathaoirleach.
I have to agree with you, Deputy, when you say Leo started this, because he's a hard act to follow. Every time I think I come up with a new idea, I get told, oh no, Leo said that in 2015. Anyway, the Roadmap for Pensions Reform published last year commits the Government to examine and develop proposals to set a formal benchmark target of 34% of earnings for the state pension contributory, and to institute the process whereby all future changes in pension rates of payment are explicitly linked to changes in consumer prices and average wages. The Department is currently considering options to implement this commitment, having examined previous studies on benchmarking and indexation, international experiences and examination of a range of potential benchmarks and indices. And I think it's worthy of note that the current rates of payments already closely mirror the benchmark link process in previous reports, including those proposed by the Social Welfare Benchmarking and Indexation Group of 2001, which usually relied on the advocacy and other groups. But I do want to acknowledge in particular Sean Healy, but also the EAPN, the Child Network, the Children's Alliance. They're all genuinely in favour of pursuing the conversation around this and to try and come up collectively with an algorithm of what we can agree what that benchmarking should be benchmarked against. In the terms of the wider application of indexation of social welfare payments, Section 19 of the Social Welfare Pensions and Civil Registration Act of 2018 provides that I, as Minister, will arrange to consult with stakeholders in examining ways of how we can actually social welfare rates are increased, with the aim of ensuring in law the advocacy for all recipients, and I'm doing that. I met with them last week, only at the Brexit day, but we arranged that we're going to sit down in the next number of weeks to have the start of that consultative process, because I think it's really important that if we decide to do something, either collectively as a House with regard to benchmarking, I can't do it without the collective will of the people in the organisations that represent the people who are most at need in this country. So we all have to agree on the algorithm, we all have to agree that it's going to be sustainable, and that we also have to ensure, though, that there won't be cuts in the future, as was inflicted upon the Department of Social Welfare over the last number of years.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Broughan.
Statement before that there wouldn't be drastic increases, but there would be no drastic decreases either. But I mean, if you went on the record of the CPI, obviously there were effectively deflationary years, and then there were years where there was very or seemed to be very little increase in the consumer price index. So are you saying then, I mean, will the department do any kind of impact assessments? I noticed when you responded to my Sinn Féin colleague, I think, on this subject before, you kind of gave global figures. You didn't really give any indication of, well, if it wasn't a fiver increase across the board, what would it be? And you know, this morning, I think TASC, the think tank for action on social change, they published a report cherishing all equally inequality in Ireland and Europe and Ireland today. And I mean, they once again highlight, of course, that the lower four quartiles of the population only get less than or just slightly over, I think, 20% of national income, and the key importance of social transfers, especially for lone-parent families and for many of our senior citizens. So, I mean, this is an area where the general proposal could be welcome, but it's something that we need to be very careful, Minister, about how we would implement and how we do it going forward, and especially given the fact that parts of the social welfare system at the moment, for example, the Christmas bonus, it doesn't appear really anywhere in the basic accounts. You know, it's a last-minute decision, and I know it's the final point. The last 2 years, you had to come back to the Minister of Finance, I think, on both occasions to get, was it 50 million more for the disability allowance budget, for example, to make sure you had enough money for the year. So just again, anxious to know, when will the department publish something in this area?
Thank you, Deputy. I'm going to bring in Deputy Willie O'Dea, who is question number 91 in the same group with it. Willie O'Dea, and then
on this particular topic?
Yes.
Sorry, what topic were we on again?
Number 53.
Oh yes. Can I ask the Minister, would she agree with me that insofar as many of the rates of social welfare at the moment are somewhat below the poverty line, that the idea of indexing those to inflation would mean that those people would be permanently locked into poverty? So we have to reach a benchmark. We have to reach a benchmark to bring people above the poverty line before we decide on what particular form of indexation we need to pursue.
We'll bring in Deputy John Brady as well.
Very briefly, and the Minister would be aware in the pre-budget forum discussions last year, this index linking the payments to adequacy was one of their top priorities, and the Minister would be also aware that last year Sinn Féin, myself, introduced the Social Welfare Commission Bill, which would exactly do what the Minister is talking about here, and it would have been very much in line with the work of the Low Pay Commission, essentially taking it out of hands of government and into the hands of a commission. Now, I've been trying to correspond with your officials, trying to get a meeting to try to discuss that and bring forward those proposals that are contained in that bill. So just can I ask the Minister as to whether she's had a look at the bill, as to whether she thinks there is merit in it, because I think generally we're talking about the same thing here, but essentially it shouldn't be linked to CPI solely. It needs to be linked to adequacy, and that's the key point to all of this. So can I ask just around the Sinn Féin Social Welfare Commission Bill? Thanks, Caroline.
First of all, you're right when you talk about the supplementary that we have most years with regard to one scheme or another. It's because it's demand-led, and if there's a higher demand, obviously then there's a higher need. But the cost of disability tender is going out hopefully by the end of this month, and that body of work is going to inform all disability payments in the future arising from the special cost of living that they have over and above a job seeker or a pensioner and stuff, and I hope that to inform us. Now, it will take probably 12 months, and it may not be in a position. I've asked for preliminary results if I can before this year's budget. They may not be able to, but I think my intentions are clear that I need to reflect people's real lived experience with regard to disability, and it isn't the same as another job seeker. We're also going to follow up on the commitment that we are going to consult, and I expect that to happen before, on and during our pre-budget forum that we have every year in July. But I will engage with our social partners many times between now and July, because what I'd like to do is be able to finalise the algorithm. And it's true to say, Deputy Brady, and thank you, and yes, I have read your bill, and I would very much hope that you will continue to process your thoughts and your views into this conversation that we're going to have with the social partners. The index that we use isn't as simple as just lining it against one or the other. I think we need to come up with an amalgamation of an algorithm of what we actually decide is going to provide adequacy in either pensionable age or at working age or from a person with a disability, and that needs to be defined and I think and agreed by all of us. Otherwise it's not going to pass in this House and I'll be wasting my time. Deputy O'D, I think I differ from what you've just said. All of our payments at the moment are above the 30% index rate, but you are right. It can't just be, if we decide it's 30% and people are below the 30%, they have to be brought up to whatever it is that we agree before you actually introduce indexing and then allow it to move on thereafter. It's not a case of like what we have with the Low Pay Commission. If we had a minimum wage, people have to be brought up to the minimum wage before we could then allow the Low Pay Commission to do its work on an annual basis, and I think we all expect and respect the report that comes from there. This has to be the same. We all have to agree that the starting bar is X, and then we all have to agree what the algorithm is, or the indexing calculation is to get to us a Y recommendation every single year from whoever the body is, the equivalent of the Low Pay Commission for this, or whatever authority we decide we can trust with it. But there has to be a baseline that we all agree, and an algorithm and a calculation that we all agree.
You will be able to publish something following your consultations so that we could all look at that then and perhaps come back and see how it relates to the poverty levels and so on. Because I mean, when you look back at reports like the Silk report, I think the survey in income and living conditions, the CSO report 2017, I mean, it showed, I think at that stage, 1 in 5 of our children, and 1 in 5 households with children living in poverty below the poverty line, and you did commit, I think, as a government to trying to take 100,000 children out of poverty. So, I mean, it's intimately related, as we all know, to the transfer payments, to social protection payments, and you know, if we did go the index-linked route, you know, clearly having a benchmark of adequacy, you know, is the key requirement. Plus the fact that, I mean, as you know, the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Office, has been very critical of the ad hoc way we've done the Christmas bonus and the ad hoc way we've done increases over the years, rather than actually planning the expenditure and saying we're going to do this indefinitely into the future. And you know, we've had other very damning, you might have seen a report at the weekend, Minister, from Professor Jan Rigby of Maynooth, saying that life expectancy rates had fallen, the increase had fallen during the austerity years, which is a damning, it's a damning report on our social protection system. Thanks, Kerlock.
Now, I'm trying to get another question. We're running short of time, but it's your question as well. Yeah, you want? Yeah. When? Yeah. Well, you're taking with this one. This one, if you want to. I know that, but yeah, the Minister's going to respond anyway now. Yeah, well, quickly. All right.
Auto enrolment is a separate question.
Okay.
Would you? I'd like an answer if the Minister is willing to give.
Anyway, Minister.
Well, okay, look, the consultations that I'll have with the partners is not going to be in secret, and there's none of them are shy about telling anybody what we talk about. I think this is only going to work if we all want the same thing, which is to provide advocacy in our income levels for our pensioners, for our people who have disabilities or varying levels of ability, and our job seekers, and I think that's the aim that we're going to have. And I would like to have it concluded and agreed upon, I know it's a bit of a miracle, by July, so that it can feed into next year's budgetary process, and that's the aim.